Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and in Miyat Hashem today we will be learning Tav Kuf Chav Hey Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Kuf Chav Dalid Amid Beis, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, with the last word on the line, Vehu, and that is in the midst of Siman Shin Tesvav Sif Yud Aleph. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus for Chayla Yisrael. They should have a refuah shalema. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over all of our brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. B'chol makom shehem. Okay, so in Sif Yud Aleph yesterday, we learned the halacha of Akilas Chasanim, the bridal canopy over a bed. Now, the halacha that we learned yesterday, and since yesterday I had time to go ahead and assemble a proper kilas chasanim over here. So here we have our bed. Okay, bed's got a headboard, bed's got a footboard. We've got 2 posts coming up in the center, one in the center of the headboard, one in the center of the footboard. Whoops. And my pole just fell on the floor. Pardon me. 1 second. I need that pole. Okay, we got it back. And we've got a pole that's going from the vertical beam coming up from the headboard to the vertical beam of the footboard, and we've got our kila, we've got our canopy on top. Now, the kula that we learned about in the beginning of Sif Yod Aleph was that if there are strings, ropes, chutin of some kind attached to the edge of the kila that are used to draw the kila open and closed, then you're allowed to open this and close this on Shabbos. And we explained yesterday the reason for this is as follows. This kila forms an oyel arai. An oyel arai is an issa d'Rabbanan. But when it comes to this oyel arai, there's an additional mitigating factor, l'kula. And that is that at its peak, at the top, we don't have a horizontal plane of 1 tefach. We don't have the width of a tefach. So this is an oyel arai she'ein begaga tefach. Now, once we're dealing with an oyel arai she'ein begaga tefach, there is no way for this to be an issa d'oraisa, right? We're going like the Rishonim, who hold that the fact that there's no gag of a tefach means this can never be more than an issa d'Rabbanan. So since we have that mitigating factor, the Mechaber gave us this kula over here in Sif Yod Aleph, that if there are strings attached to the edge, so it's very, very obvious that this is something which is meant to be opened and closed, then so long as this was put in place before Shabbos, we look at when you open it. When I say put in place, what I mean is everything was assembled over here, but even if the curtain was opened when Shabbos came in, doesn't have to be closed at least a tefach. You could go ahead and you could slide this open and closed, because when you slide it closed, we don't look at it that you're creating an oyel arai. We look at it as if you're being moisif, you're adding on or you're extending a pre-existing oyel arai. We look at this as being a case of being moisif al oyel arai. And again, we have to be very clear. Why is that? What's the basis for this kula? It's a combination of factors. First of all, without the mitigating kula, without the mitigating fact that this is an oyel arai she'ein begaga tefach, if at the top over here we would have a tefach wide, then we wouldn't apply this kula. Even if there are strings that show that it's meant to be open and closed, we would not allow you to close this on Shabbos if it had a gag of a tefach. Once there's a gag of a tefach, it's much more chomer. The reason we can have this kula, the reason we can apply this kula in this place, is because this is an oyel arai she'ein begaga tefach. And combine that with the fact that there are chutin on the edge of the kila that show that this is something meant to be drawn open, drawn closed, drawn open, drawn closed. So we don't look at it that on Shabbos, if you go ahead and you draw it closed, you just made an oyel. No, this whole thing was pre-existing. It's only being moisif al an oyel arai. Now, I stressed this now because we weren't able to cover yesterday the final halacha of Sif Yod Aleph. That's where we're up to, the last word, second line up from the bottom, v'hu. Now I'm going to tell you the halacha outside first, and that way it'll be very easy for us to just read through it. And this is something which is very, very complex. I'm going to give you the simple way through it. Now, again, I just stressed very much that one of the ikrim of the kula of Sif Yod Aleph is the fact she'ein begaga tefach. The bottom line is that when you close this canopy, you are not creating a roof of a tefach, and that's why we could have this kula. Now, let's say that wasn't the case. Let's say that up at the top over here, instead of having a narrow pole going across it, let's say you had a wide pole going across it. And let's say this wide pole is a tefach, so that when you drape the kila over, you're going to create an oil of a tefach. In that case, we wouldn't apply this kula, because now you're dealing with yesh begaga tefach, much more chomer. Okay, now let's discuss another case. If you take a look at this bed that I've constructed over here, you'll see that the bed has feet, right? It has legs on each side. So when this bed is sitting on the floor, there's going to be a gap between the underside of the bed platform and the floor. Let's imagine that that gap is at least a tefach. That gap is a tefach or more. Now, let's imagine that when you take your kila and you close your kila is not only going to cover up the area on top of the bed platform, it's actually going to drape down over the side of the bed, and it's going to form mechitzas on both sides that are going to curtain in or wall in the gap that's under the bed platform. So again, when you close this, right, it's not long enough to really show you, but the kila is going to be up here, but the kila is very long. So it's going to drape down on both sides, and it is going to vertically extend from the edge of the bed platform down to the floor. And it's going to act as mechitzos that are going to surround this area between the underside of the bed platform on the floor, and that is at least 1 tefach high. In that case, the Mechaber says this is going to be aser. Now let's first read it in the Mechaber, then I'll explain to you why it's aser, then we'll read the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mechaber, V'hu shaloi tehei mishul sheles me'al hamita tefach. This heter of the kilas chasanim only applies if the kila is not going to drape down, it's not going to extend past the bed platform vertically down to the floor, and it's not going to be covering an area of a tefach between the underside of the bed platform and the floor. Now, why is this aser? So let me explain to you outside the easy way to understand this. This entails a pretty complex machlokes rishonim, and then some machlokes amongst the achronim how to properly understand the machlokes rishonim. But I'll give it to you in what seems to be the simplest way possible. As I've stressed over and over and over again yesterday and since the beginning of today's shir, one of the underpinnings of the heter of the kila is the fact that at the top of the roof you don't have a gag of a tefach. Okay, let's remove the kila for a moment. When the kila drapes down over the edge of the bed platform, okay, and it walls in the area under the bed platform, does the area under the bed platform have a gag of a tefach? Absolutely. The bed platform is more than a tefach wide. So when the kila goes over the pole at the top, drops down vertically over the edge of the bed frame, and goes down to the floor, and surrounds the area underneath the bed platform, you now have an area underneath the bed platform that has a gag of a tefach, and it's at least a tefach high. So it is a chashuv area. If you would create a gag from scratch over that area, if you did it lahagain, right? If you made a gag, if you made an oil that's also lahagain over an area that's at least a tefach high, that would be an issa d'Rabbanan, even if there are no mechitzas around it. If it's not also lahagain, like when you stand up a bed, right? When you stand up a bed, you're forming an oil, but it's not also lahagain. In that case, we learned it's only also if there are mechitzas around it. But in our case over here, we have a very interesting issue. The reason that it's mutter to close this kila over the bed is because there's no gag of a tefach. But now the kila that you're opening and closing is going down over the side of the bed, and it is walling in an area that does have a gag of a tefach. So you are, in fact, sheltering an area that has a gag of a tefach. Now, you're not putting up that gag of a tefach. The bed was here already. You're not erecting the gag of the tefach. You're erecting the gag over the bed. You're closing the kila over the bed. That's the kila, that's the oil that you're putting in place on Shabbos, right? It was opened, and now you closed it. So what did you roof in? You roofed in primarily the area over the bed platform. The gag of the bed platform, that was already there. You didn't put it up now. But, say the Rishonim and the Achrayim, when you put up this kila that extends past the bed platform, you're creating a shelter, right? Up here, over the bed platform, you're creating a shelter. There's no question that that's an oil. It's an oiled arai that you're allowed to make on Shabbos because it has chutin, but you are creating a shelter, and you're doing it with the kavana that it should be a shelter, and at the same time, you're also sheltering the area underneath the bed. And the area underneath the bed happens to have a pre-existing gag tefach. But the bottom line is, when you close this kila that extends over the side of the bed, you are creating a shelter that is going to shelter an area underneath the bed that is at least a tefach tall and has a gag of a tefach. And therefore, says the Mechaber, this is an Isser d'Rabbanan. Now, like I said, the Harbe Kolmusim Nishbarim al Zeh. There's a lot of lines of Torah that are written on this. If you take a look in the Rambam, Parak Chaf Beis Halacha Lamed, Parak Chaf Beis Halacha Lamed, you'll see this halacha. That's the source for this halacha in the Rishonim is the Rambam. This is taken just about verbatim from the Rambam. There's a Magid Mishnah over there that brings down a Rashba that essentially says what I'm telling you now. One of the debates that go on in the Rishonim is this fact that it's usher to close this kila. Why is it usher? Is it usher because now somehow the roof, the kila that you're putting up over the bed platform now becomes more significant to oil? Is it because the bed platform becomes a gag? There's different lashonis between Rashi and the Rashba, the Rif, but it seems, especially if you take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan as well, and at that Magid Mishnah, this seems to be the easy way to cut through the fog, sort of, surrounding this halacha. And again, the issue is that since the kila extends past the bed frame, and it's going to shelter an area under the bed platform that is a tefach high and has a gag of a tefach, and the kila that you're closing is also lahagain, you're doing it for the purpose and with the intent to create a shelter. So as part of that act of creating that shelter and closing that kila over the bed, you're also creating a shelter underneath the bed. And even though that roof, the bed platform, was pre-existing, but that wasn't acting as a gag. That wasn't put there to be a gag. Now you're roofing in the whole area, right? When you put up that kila, you're roofing in the area over the bed. You're also sheltering the area under the bed. So we consider that as if you're creating a gag over the area underneath the bed, and this is aser. And we can see this is the words of the Mishnah Berurah. I think you could apply what I'm saying. I think you could read what I'm saying into the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah did a masterful job over here. I've said it many times. You see this oftentimes by Gedolim, where they have this ability to choose their words so carefully. The Chavetz Chaim did not want to write a ganze pilpul over here on Sif Yod Aleph. I thought that he might do it in the Bir Halacha, but he does spend some time on it in the Bir Halacha. But he wanted to thread the needle. And I think he was working with what he saw in the Rashba, what he saw in Rashi, what he saw in the Achrayim, and he chose his words very carefully. And it could be because of that you could read many different pshatim into what the Mishnah Berurah says. I'm choosing this path through the issue. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Membeis. Hatam. The reason this is also the kevachi mishul shelas be alamita tefach bezikifa la'achar kloisa shipua. Since the kila is hanging off the edge of the bed. That's what it means. Mishul shelas me alamita. It's hanging off the edge of the bed platform. Tefach biskifa, and then it's going down vertically, a tefach biskifa, because the area underneath the bed platform is a tefach high. La'akar klois hashipua, after the slope of the kila ended, right? The kila was a slope, it came down to the bed platform, then the slope ended, and it goes vertically down a tefach. Havelei high tefach mechitza, this tefach is now acting as a mechitza, walling in the area underneath the bed. Now that doesn't make anything usher, because there's no isser of making a mechitzas arai on Shabbos. Now the entire slope on both sides that's above the bed platform, nechshav legag, it's now considered a gag. What does that mean that it's considered a gag? It doesn't have a gag tefach. So how did it magically, in the beginning of Sif Yod Aleph, we had a ganze kula that you could close this kila because it doesn't have a gag tefach? So what do you mean now suddenly it becomes a gag? How did it become a gag? The reason it became a gag is because now it's sheltering the area underneath the bed platform. And the bed platform is a gag tefach. And the kila is sheltering in that area. That makes the whole kila, right? The kila is one piece. It gives the kila in its entirety a din of a gag that's sheltering in an area that has a gag tefach. Okay. They have an oil mamish. Now, coming off of this halacha, the Chavetz Chaim realized people are now going to have a major shaila. People are going to say, hold it. So you're telling me, because this kila drapes off the edge of the bed and goes down a tefach, I can't put the kila in place. Okay, how about spreading out a blanket over a bed? I have a blanket on a bed, and again, the bed, like this bed over here, right? Let's take our fancy walls off the bed. How about I just have a bed, and underneath the bed, there's a tefach, and I have a blanket. Am I allowed to throw a blanket over the bed and let the blanket drape off the side of the bed and shelter in the area of a tefach? Says the Mishnah Berurah, there's no problem with that. Miu, mita didon, she'ein kilo aleha she'parsin aleha sadin. In the case where we have a problem, it's because you're creating a shelter over the area on top of the bed platform. But by our beds, she'ein kilo aleha she'parsin aleha sadin, we're not creating a canopy over the top of the bed. Afapi denochus miporia tefach, even if the blanket, drapes over the edge of the bed and it goes down a tefach to the floor, less lanba. There's no problem. Vatam, the reason is, and this gives a clue to how I'm learning pshat in this whole Mishnah Berurah. What the Mishnah Berurah is saying is like this. To throw a blanket over this bed and allow it to go over the edge of the bed and wall in the area under the bed is not a problem. You know why? Because now you cannot say hey, the blanket is sheltering in an area that has a gag tefach, and therefore throwing the blanket on should constitute making an oil. No, there's by no stretch of the imagination can you call this blanket an oil. There's no area where it's acting as a roof at all. It's only acting as a mechitza for the area under the bed. It's not acting as a roof anywhere because it's laying flat on the bed platform. In our case, where it's elevated above the platform, the top of the kila is acting as an oil, albeit an oil that doesn't have a gag tefach. But it's an oil. Now that it also serves to shelter in the area underneath the bed that does have a gag tefach, it becomes aser. But to do this can't become aser because nowhere is this kila a gag. Nowhere. It's not a kila, it's a blanket. Nowhere is this blanket a gag. All it is a mechitza. Making a mechitzas arai is mutter. Same thing a tablecloth. Imagine if this is a table and not a bed. You're allowed to throw the tablecloth over the table even if it hangs down on both sides all the way to the floor. And even if there are lots of tefachim between the floor and the underside of the table. Because nowhere is the table a gag. The tablecloth a gag. The tablecloth doesn't act as a gag anywhere. It lays flat on the table surface. So this would not be an issue. Okay. Moving along now. Bottom line. Kuf Chav Ta'alan Amid Beis. Sif Yud Beis. Hanoite paroiches v'kayotzeba. Somebody who hangs up a paroiches, and this may mean the paroiches on an Aron Kodesh, or any other paroiches, any other kind of curtain that you're hanging to shut a place off, to create a mechitza. Hanoite paroiches v'kayotzeba. If somebody's hanging a curtain, tzarich li zaher, he has to take care, shalayasa oyel b'shashe noite, that when he's hanging the curtain, he should not inadvertently create an oyel. Now, what does he mean? What he means is like this. You've got a curtain, okay? So the curtain is vertical. And all it is a vertical curtain. And we learned that to make a mechitzas arai is never an issa d'Rabbanan. To make a mechitzas arai is fine. Now, you want to hang this curtain up, and maybe you're hanging the curtain on a rod. Now, maybe it's one of these curtains that has a pocket in the top that the rod goes through, right? Now, there are curtains where the pocket is at the top of the curtain. There are also curtains that have like a fancy, maybe a pleated area at the top, okay, like this. And the pocket is, let's say, several inches, could be 6 inches, 8 inches down on the curtain. The pocket that the rod goes into is over here. Now, if that's the case, this top of the curtain can fold over, right? Now, let's fold it. Probably should have used something that wasn't white. It would show up better in the camera, but it is what it is. You see, now, yeah, white is not great. Well, I have this, but it's not stiff, right? Let's say what happens is that the pocket is low down, and now the top of the curtain folds over. It has an overhang. Okay, I think I have the answer to my problem. I think the answer to my problem is right here. Even though it's white, I think it'll work anyway. Okay, there you go. Okay, put it against my bekisha. You have the contrast, and now you can see, right? So if it's hanging over the rod like this, you've got this horizontal area here that can act as a gag. Now, the curtain that you're hanging isn't necessarily bent the way this one is. What the Shulchan Aruch is saying is, when you go to hang a curtain, even if the curtain is a vertical curtain, depending on how thick and stiff the curtain is, and depending on how exactly you're hanging it, you may inadvertently fold over the top of the curtain while you're hanging the curtain and create an oyel arai. And that could be problematic. That's what the Machaber is saying over here. He's saying when you hang the curtain, sarach li zayar, you have to take care shalayasa oyel b'shasha noita, that you don't accidentally make an oyel while you're hanging it. Lefikach, therefore, imi paroiches gedola, if you're dealing with a very long, a very wide, shall we say, curtain, toilin oisa shnayim, you should use two people to hang it, meaning one person should hold it from one end, the other person should hold it from the other end, and they should make sure, you see, if one is holding it on one end, one is holding it on the other end, they can make sure to pull it taut, and they can have it straight in the vertical, and they don't have to worry that part of it is going to fold over into the horizontal. Aval echad aser. But it's also for one person to hang it, because while he's manipulating it and he's reaching from one end to the other, he may fold over part of it and he may create an oyhel aray. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. Bottom of Kuf Chav Daled Amud Beis Cut Mem Gimel. Hanoita Pareiches Kol Zeh Lashon Rambam. This is taken directly from the Rambam. Now we have to remember, the Mishnah Berurah reminds us of something he told us earlier. With Sfirale, the shita of the Rambam is, even though the Sfirale the Rambam holds, Dav Shem Estama Yeshaleh Chutin Mimi Ereshabishi Tluya Behen. Even though the shitas Rambam is, we have taken the position, yet from the beginning, the Mishnah Berurah has taken the position that we paskin like the Rishonim, that it is always mutter to hang a vertical curtain. You don't need chutin. The chutin that we spoke about by the kila on the bed, right? We said that you only need that in the case of the bed, because over there we're constructing an oil, we're constructing a horizontal shelter. But when we're hanging a vertical curtain, we've taken the position that you don't need chutin to show that this is meant to be open and closed. But that's not the Shittas Rambam. Shittas Rambam is that you do need chutin. Therefore, it says the Mishnah Berurah, with Sfirle, the Mechaber is going according to the Rambam, who holds Davshem Estama Yeshaleh Chutin Mimiyar Shabbos, even though this curtain has chutin on it, she tluya behen, di'elavach yasel l'tleisel adaita, because according to the Rambam, if you don't have chutin, you're not allowed to put up this curtain. If you'd, you still have to be careful. All the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, remember, we hold that you're always allowed to hang a vertical curtain. The Rambam requires chutin. The Mechaber is going like the Rambam. So ostensibly, this curtain that you're hanging is going to have chutin. Still in all, even though you have two mitigating factors here, it's a vertical curtain and it has chutin, still you have to be careful that the top doesn't fold over to create an oil. This is a concern at the time that you're hanging the curtain kolaimar. This is to say, the b'shasha oisik b'tliyasa, while you're working to hang the curtain, derechu shemiskapelas ma'at me'rachba. Very often, when you're working you're holding a curtain near the top could fold over. V'im kefal tefach hevelei oil. And if it ends up folding and you have an overhang of a tefach, you're creating an oil. Now, the truth is, you're creating an oil. Is it also lahagain? You're not doing it to shelter over anything. If it's not also lahagain, so you need mechitzas in order for it to be innocent rabbanan. So exactly what is the concern over here? Unless the concern is that when you're putting up a curtain, you are doing something lahagain, right? When you put up a curtain, when you put up a partition, that is for the purposes of shelter. Maybe therefore, if it folds over, it becomes a problem, even if there are no mechitzas underneath it. I'm thinking out loud. You need two people to hang this curtain. Because if you have two people, one holding it from one end and one holding it from the other end, they could both hold it in the vertical and hang it in a manner in which it will not fold. For this reason, people are very careful not to put up a pareiches on Shabbos. Weiter. Second line down in the Mechaber. V'im haisa kila sheyesh la gag ein moischin haisa va'afilo asara. If you have a canopy that does have a gag of a tefach, even 10 people cannot work to hang it. She'efshe shalei tigma ma'at me'ala aretz v'teyasa oyel arai. It's impossible that you will not inadvertently create an oyel arai. Okay, that was a mouthful. Let's look at the Mishnah Berurah and try to understand what the Mechaber is talking about, at least according to the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut memvav. Hainu. What is this kila? Hainu Uria Prusa Milamala. This is a sheet or a curtain that is in the overhead. It's acting as an oil. Al Ezadavar. It's hanging on something. Venasis ki ein talis kfula shebeyarnu b'sif yud. And it creates something like the talis kfula that we spoke about in Sif Yud. That was the pole between the two opposing walls, and the curtain draped on top of it. So now we're going back to a case where we have a sheet, and the intent with this sheet is to hang it overhead to act as a shelter for the area underneath it. Now, certainly you can't do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to put up an oil arai on Shabbos, right? The talis kfula that we spoke about on Erev Shabbos, the heter over there was it didn't have a gag tefach, right? And it had chutin that you were going to use to draw it open and draw it closed. Over here, we're talking about something that is going to have a gag tefach. And therefore, certainly, you're not allowed to put up this oil on Shabbos. So what are we speaking about over here? Umayri, we're talking about, says the Chavetz Chaim, b'shekarach alachutamishicha miba'od yom. Diomio de paroiches to argue ba meikar de tzarach l'das arambam shielei karachut miba'od yom v'chanal b'sif yud. What we're talking about over here is, we're talking about this curtain has some kind of rope or some kind of string attached to it, and it sounds like it has strings or something attached on all four corners. But over here we're talking about where it has a gag tefach. Over here we're talking about not where it's narrow, where it does have a gag tefach. Hainu, sheyal kol panim agag rechav tefach, v'choshken hechash agag rechav harbe. Di ein lo l'mayla rechav tefach, alay kabelon demutal l'parsa l'kol yama kishakar chalechot on mishicha miba'od yom. What did the Mishnah Berurah tell us over here so far? We're talking about a sheet that we're hanging up on top to serve as a shelter. To hang it up the way it is, certainly you're not allowed to do this. This is Rabbanan. You're creating an oil arai. That is 100% aser. What is it that you want to do that the Mechaber is saying is aser? Let's see. Mem Zayin. She'efsher. It's saying the loimer. What the Mechaber wants to tell you over here is the loinema. You should not say heicha sha'akilihi rechava. If this sheet is very big and very wide, and now you'll take a bunch of people, shekol echad yikshar rak zavis hakilo lak salim. You have one person standing at each corner. I'm trying to think if there's a way that I could portray this. It's kind of hard. Let's see. Bear with me while I play with my toys. Okay. The kila is intended to shelter this area between the posts. Come on. Now, to do this on Shabbos is 100% aser. That's creating mechitzas arai on Shabbos. That is 1,000% aser. There's no way you're allowed to do it. The shaila is this. This kila has strings attached on all the corners. You have four people. What you want to do is, you want to have, What you want to do is, you want to have one guy tie it at this corner. You want to have another guy tie it at that corner. So now it's tied at both of these corners. Now, at this moment, this curtain, please. Sorry for my frustration here. At this moment, this urea, this sheet, is not forming an oil over anything, right? Now what you want to do is, you want to have another two guys. You want one guy to tie it at this corner, and you want another guy to tie it at this corner, so that it should be tied at all four corners. But is it up overhead? It's not up overhead, creating an oil over the intervening area. What it's doing is, it's tied at the upper corners, but it's draping down, right? It drapes down in here, and then your intent is that it's going to lay across the bottom over here, and then ultimately it's going to go up the other side. So you're right, to put it up across the top would be 100% aser. That would be creating a mechitzas arai on Shabbos, and it's d'Rabbanan. All you want to do is, you've got this kila, it's laying around, you want to put it in place on Shabbos, you want to put it away. So you want to affix it to the four corners, and you want to let it hang down like a U, so that it's not forming an oil over any space. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says the Mechaber is telling us is aser. Again, let's see Mem Zayin. We're trying to Loimar. The Loinema, you should not say, Hecha Shakila Hirachava, if it's a very big curtain. Shekol Echa Yiksha Rakzavis Akila Laksalim. Each one of the four people will tie one corner to the area. Vinishar Emtza Akila Munach Alakarka. And now the middle is laying on the ground, or in the case that I showed you on the bed surface. The ain't shame oil aleh, so it's not an oil. Kamash Balon that this is aser, and the reason it's aser is because it seems that the Mechaber holds that it would be a psik reisha, that at some point while you're doing this, it's actually going to be picked up a tefach off the bottom, and it's going to form an oil. Okay, moving along to Sif Yud Gimel. Sif Yud Gimel, also a very, very difficult Sif. The truth is, there are certain shilas lamaisa that come to mind when you learn Sif Yud Gimel. Most of them, it seems, are mutter and are not negeya really, but we'll have to see. Says the Mechaber Sif Yud Gimel, Beged sheshoitchin al piachavis lachasos. You have a barrel. The barrel has an open top. You want to take a sheet, or you want to take, let's say, a sheet of leather, or a sheet of plastic, or tin foil, and you want to cover the opening of the barrel. So you've got a barrel, and you're roofing over the interior of the barrel with your sheet of tinfoil. Is there a problem here of creating an oihel arai on Shabbos? Says the Mechaber, Beged sheshoitchin al piachavis, if you're putting a cloth over the opening of a barrel, l'chasos, to cover it, lo yishtechenu al pnei kulai, you should not cover the entire barrel. Why? Mishum oil. Because by doing so, you're creating an oil. Eliyaniach tzas megula. Rather, what you have to do is, you have to leave part of the opening of the barrel uncovered. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. So right away, the Mishnah Berurah says, hold it. If we do the math, this seems very odd. Why? Let's take a look, the Mishnah Berurah says, at a case that the Gemara speaks about. You're allowed to put a pot on top of a kira, and we need not be concerned b'shum oil because of the isser of oil. What are we talking about here? So if you remember, all the way back in the beginning of Chelik Gimel, we spoke about different types of ovens. One type of oven, or stove, is a kira. So the kira was a tall, hollow structure, round. It had a door, let's say in the front, where you could put in your wood and your coals and your fuel. On the roof of this kira, there was an opening. And that's where you put your pot. You put your pot down on the opening on the upper surface of the kira. Now let's think about this a second. You have a kira. The kira has an interior. It's got a hole on top. You take a pot, you put it on top of the kira. Didn't you just form an oihel over the interior of the kira? Yet, the Gemara says this is 100% mutter. There's no isser here of putting a pot on top of the kira and creating a roof over the interior of the kira. Now, so then why does the Mechaber tell us over here that to put a beged on top of an open barrel is a problem of creating an oil? L'chayra, those two cases are exactly the same. What's the difference between the two? Now, let's step back. Indeed, why is it mutter to put the pot on top of the kira? So the truth is, we have enough information from everything that we've learned in Shin Tes Vav. We know why it's mutter. You know why it's mutter? Because remember, over here, are you creating an oil? Is this asli lahagen? Are you putting the pot on top of the kira in order to shelter the area inside the kira? No. You're putting the pot on top of the kira so that the contents of the pot should get hot. You're not doing it for shelter. This is not asli lahagen. Okay, if it's not asli lahagen, then in order for this to be aser, you need mechitzas surrounding what's underneath the oil. Now, do you have mechitzas? Yes, you do. You have the walls of the kira, so you do have mechitzas. But there's another thing you need. You need that it should be erected kisidron. You need that you should put up first the walls, and then you should put on the roof. Now, in this case, you are putting up the roof after the walls are already there. But did you erect the walls on Shabbos? No, this kier has been there for 2 years. You didn't erect the walls on Shabbos and then put up the roof, right? This is the walls were pre-existing from before Shabbos, and now you put the pot on. Now you put the roof on. That's why this is 100% mutter. There's no problem here. So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah does. It says the Mishnah Berurah like this. In a case like this where you're not doing it lahagein, you're not putting up a roof in order to shelter, you're putting out a pot on a fire. It happens to be that by doing that, you're creating a roof. The only way this would be aser is if you make mechitzas, and you have to make the mechitzas on Shabbos, and you have to make the mechitzas on Shabbos before you make the roof. And that's not what's happening here. So then why is it aser over here to put tinfoil on top of the barrel? L'chayr, it's the same thing. The walls of the interior of the barrel pre-existed. They were there from before Shabbos. Now, when you put the tinfoil on, you're roofing over the interior of the barrel, but you're not doing it lahagein. So why is there an issue over here? Yesh Laimar. Mishnah Berurah says you could say, Hayil va'kuba rechava yoser midai nase ka'oil. Magen Avram says a very big chiddush here. Magen Avram says that when it comes to an exceptionally large keli, we do not say that the walls of the keli were pre-existing, and now when you put up the oil, you're not making mechitzas and then a roof. You're only making a roof. Now the Mishnah Berurah doesn't explain to Magen Avram. He doesn't say why. So there's a famous Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish says like this. The Chazon Ish says, by the kira, a kira is relatively small. The mechitzas of the kira, the walls of the kira, are very obviously there to enclose the interior of the kira. When you look in the kira, you're looking in and you're seeing an area that's walled in by the walls of the kira. So we look at those walls as being pre-existing mechitzas from before Shabbos, and when you put on the roof, you're only putting on a roof, and therefore it's mutter. When it comes to an exceptionally large keli, don't think barrel, think vat. When you're talking about something that's very, very large, we don't look at those walls as being unified walls that are walling in the interior of the vat. But when you go and you put on a cover and you drape a cover from end to end, from side to side, right? Now you're unifying the whole keli, and now the Chazon Ish says, the Magen Avram holds that it's as if you're first creating the mechitzas now. Okay? It's a very lamdush. It's a difficult concept, but this is the way the Magen Avram, this is what the Magen Avram says, and this is how the Chazon Ish wants to explain the Magen Avram. Now, having said this, there are many achronim that disagree with this Magen Avram, but the Mishnah Berurah is bringing down this Magen Avram. Well, if he's there, according to this, Mashakasav Shulchan Aruch Chavis. Now, if you're going to learn the Mechaber this way, so then when the Mechaber says Chavis, which usually means barrel or jug, Hainu Nami Berachava Harbe. He must be talking about a vat, not a simple barrel. The same halacha would apply to an exceptionally large box that has a cover. If the cover of this box is not attached with hinges, you wouldn't be allowed to put the cover on the box on Shabbos because you're creating an oil over the interior of the box. And again, we're going to say that when you put the cover on, it's as if you're first making the mechitzas now. But something that's not so large is mutter. So I'll just tell you right now that the poskim say covering pots is not an issue. Now, don't learn this today, then go home and say you're not allowed to cover a pot. Or I have a 14-quart stock pot, you're not allowed to put the cover on the stock pot. On Shabbos, you have to leave it off halfway because you're making an oil inside the stock pot. No. There are poskim that say that when we talk about a very large keli here, we're talking about memsa, which is over 100 gallons. So you're talking about exceptionally large kelim. Also, there are poskim that say if you're talking about a cover that has a handle, so it's very clearly a cover meant to go on and go off, etc., that's not called making an oil. If it's hinged, it's not called making an oil. So there are a lot of heterim over here. ואין בזה משום שהאויל האויל והמחיצס כבר עשויות. ואיך שמטלטל ממקום זה להעמיד במקום אחר ושם החסו עשו בכל גבני. Now the Mishnah Berurah has a very big chumrah here. And that is that the terim that we're speaking about here, a lot of them are based on what I told you about the kira, right? The kira, the mechitzas are pre-existing. So you could put the pot on top because you didn't make mechitzas now. But, and we've come across this before in the Mishnah Berurah, the opinion of the Mishnah Berurah is that if you pick up a keli and you move it to a new location on Shabbos and you put it down, you just erected the mechitzas in this place. And now to put on the top would be aser. So from this Mishnah Berurah would potentially come out chumras, right? If you pick up a big keli, right, and you relocate it, well, now you rebuilt the mechitzas in that new location. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, you have to take care when you make big sudais with a lot of guests. They needed folding tables. So how did they make a folding table? What they did was they took 4 barrels and they put a big board on top of the 4 barrels, and now you have a table. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, if the barrels are open on top, and now you take the barrel and you put it into a new spot, according to the Mishnah Berurah, you just built those mechitzas. Now you take the board and you put it on top of the open barrel, you made a gag over the interior of the barrel. So says the Mishnah Berurah, according to him, this becomes a real problem. So what should you do? You should take care. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you should take the barrel and turn it upside down so that the open side of the barrel is facing the floor. And now you're putting the board on top of the closed side of the barrel. So now when you put down the board, you're not creating an oil over the interior of the barrel. Now, many people ask Akasha on this. They say, but hold it. Wait a second. You're going to take the barrel upside down, right? So the opening is on the bottom, and you're going to put the barrel on the ground. Didn't you just create an oil inside the barrel? When you put the barrel down, right? When it reaches 3 tefachim close to the karka, you just built the walls of the barrel in that place, and on top there's a closed roof. So l'chayri, you just made mechitzas and a gag. Why isn't that a problem according to the Mishnah Berurah? So one teretz that's given is that you cannot call the interior of the barrel an oihel when you put it down on the ground. You know why? Because there's no way to get into it. It's all closed. So the only way to get into that oil, the only way to use that oil, would be to pick the barrel up off the ground. So putting it down on the ground does not constitute making an oil. It's a very difficult topic over here. There are shilas that do come up. You know, I'm telling you, most of the shilas end up being mutter. If you want to read, somebody who did a very nice job on this happens to be Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen. If you look in his sefer, it's one of the Shabbos home books. I don't remember which volume it is. But he has a nice write-up of it, and he has some practical cases. If you have a shaila, go ask your Rav. One last piece of Mishnah Berurah I want to do over here. Oid Kasav, the Magen Avraham also writes, the Tish Kestel. Shenishbat kula min shulchan. A tish kestel is a drawer that goes into a table. Now, we're going to have to distinguish between the drawer on the table and the drawer in a dresser. Let's say you have a table, right? So you have the tabletop. Now a tabletop. And you have a drawer that's meant to slide in and out from underneath the tabletop. Now the drawer itself is a box that's opened on top. So the drawer has its own mechitzas. Says the Magen Avraham, you have to be very careful by such a drawer. Im yesh tefach ba'omek chalala, if the drawer is a tefach deep, asur lahachzira. You're not allowed to reinsert the drawer into the table. Sha'oisa oil, because you're making an oil. What's the explanation of this? Very simple. Let's say this is the drawer, and the drawer is a tefach deep inside. Well, the drawer has walls all around it. So you've got an area tefach deep that's walled in. Now you bring it to the table and you slide it in under the tabletop. What did you just do? You just created a roof over the interior of the drawer. And in this case, you made the mechitzas are here, and when you put it in place, you're erecting the mechitzas in this place, and it has an oil on top. So you're making the mechitzas and the oil at the same time, and that would be an issa d'Rabbanan of making an oil arai on Shabbos. Now this wouldn't apply to inserting a drawer inside a dresser, because the dresser already has walls. So when you take the drawer and you put it into the dresser itself is already walled in. The mechitzas are pre-established, and you're just making a roof over the interior of the drawer when you put it in. Okay, we're going to pause over here. We'll continue further next time. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. Schus of Liman HaTorah should be making against Klai Yisrael. The Rosh should send Yeshua's refuahs parnassah sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yas Gal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.